Somewhere in the Sinai Peninsula, approximately 1300 BCE, a man climbs a mountain alone. He's been leading his people through the desert for weeks. They're frightened, exhausted, ungrateful, and very difficult. He's frustrated beyond anything he can articulate. He climbs to get away from them, to think, to pray, to find something, anything, that will tell him what to do next. What happens on that mountain changes the history of the world. He comes down carrying tablets, laws, a covenant, a new order for his people that will shape three of the world's greatest religions for the next 3,000 years. We'll never know exactly what happened on that mountain. But a Czech psychiatrist named Stanislav Grof spent 50 years building a map of what happens when the deepest layers of human consciousness are accessed directly, without filters, without the reducing valve, without the ordinary mind's careful management of what gets through. And the man who climbs a mountain in frustration and comes down transformed, bearing a new understanding of reality, a new covenant, a new set of instructions for how to live, that man is on Grof's map. Somewhere between what Grof called the death of the old self and the birth of the new one. Welcome back to Quantum Awareness. Sound is emptiness. Emptiness is sound. I'm QP, your quantum perceptor. Before we begin, if these conversations are reaching something real in you, please follow, like, and share with one person who might be ready to hear it. We're building something here together, and your engagement makes it possible. And I'm very, very grateful. In 1943, a Swiss chemist named Albert Hofmann was working in his laboratory at Sandoz Pharmaceuticals in Basel, Switzerland. He was investigating ergot derivatives, compounds from a fungal contamination of rye grain that had been causing strange mass episodes throughout European history. Episodes of convulsions, hallucinations, the sensation of burning limbs, what medieval communities called St. Anthony's fire. Oh my God. He had synthesized a compound called LSD-25 5 years earlier and set it aside as uninteresting. On April 19th, 1943, he accidentally absorbed a small amount through his fingertips. He had to leave work early. He asked his laboratory assistant to escort him home by bicycle. On that bicycle ride, 3 kilometers through Basel, he experienced the first intentional LSD trip in human history. He wrote his notes that evening. I am perceiving an uninterrupted stream of fantastic pictures, extraordinary shapes, with an intense kaleidoscope play of colors. He'd found what Huxley would find 10 years later in Los Angeles. The valve had opened. The filter had loosened. The full signal of consciousness, vastly larger than the thin trickle of ordinary waking experience, was coming through. Hofmann called LSD his problem child. He loved it and feared what would be done with it. He was right to fear. But before the chaos came the science. And the science, produced in 15 years between Hofmann's bicycle ride and the counterculture's appropriation of his discovery, was extraordinary. And the man who produced most of it was Stanislav Grof. Stanislav Grof was born in Prague in 1931. He trained as a psychiatrist. In 1956, he received his first LSD session as part of a research program at the Psychiatric Research Institute in Prague. A session that was supposed to last a few hours, instead, ended up lasting in its effects on his thinking the rest of his life. He described it afterwards as the most profound experience of his career. Not because it was pleasant. It was terrifying and extraordinary and completely unlike anything his psychiatric training had prepared him for. But because what he had encountered in that session was clearly real, not a drug effect, not a distortion, a direct encounter with dimensions of consciousness that ordinary waking awareness had never once hinted existed. He spent the next 50 years mapping what he found through thousands of sessions, first with LSD in Prague, and later at the Maryland Psychiatric Research Center in the United States, and then through a breathwork technique he developed and called holotropic breathwork that could produce the same states without chemistry. Grof built the most detailed cartography of non ordinary consciousness that Western science has ever produced. He called these states holotropic, from the Greek holos, whole, and terpin, meaning moving forward, moving toward wholenessness, moving toward the nature of mind itself. And what he found there, documented across thousands of sessions with thousands of people, was not chaos, not psychosis, and not even mere hallucination. It was structure. Grof identified two primary levels of what the valve reveals. The first level he called coex systems, systems of condensed experience. These are constellations of memories, emotions, physical sensations, and archetypal themes organized around a common emotional charge. When the valve opens, coex systems surface, not as random imagery, but as organized, coherent systems of meaning that illuminate the deep patterns of a person's psychological life. In Buddhist terms, and the parallel is precise, coex systems are the samskaras made visible, the habitual tendencies, the karmic residues, the conditioned patterns that the ordinary mind keeps below the surface, but that drive our behavior, our perception, and our relationship from underneath. The first veil, the kleshavranana, the veil of afflictive emotions, is what the coex systems are made out of. When the valve opens, these surface and can be seen clearly, for the first time without the defenses that normally keep them invisible. This is why the container matters. This is why set and setting matter. This is why the Vajrayana principle of the sacred space is not superstition. It's the recognition of that what surfaces when the valve opens needs to be met with care, with preparation, with the presence of someone who knows the territory. Grof called the second level the perinatal matrices. This is where his map becomes genuinely extraordinary and genuinely controversial. Grof proposed that beneath the personal psychological layer, beneath the coex systems, there's a deeper layer of experience organized around the biological fact of birth. Four matrices corresponding to the four stages of the birth process. Matrix 1, the oceanic state, the womb before labor begins, undifferentiated consciousness, unity, the experience of being held in something vast and warm and unbroken. The prenatal paradise, the hot tub in your mother's womb. Nothing good lasts forever. Matrix 2, the constriction. Labor begins, but the cervix has not yet opened. There's no exit. Cosmic engulfment. The universe as a trap. The hell states. The experience of being caught in something inescapable, with no way through and no way back. Just like in Star Wars, in the trash compactor scene, with Luke, Leia, Han, and Chewie. You remember, don't you? Matrix 3, the struggle and the breakthrough. The cervix opens. The titanic fight. Death and rebirth beginning to become the same thing. Volcanic energy. The battle that cannot be avoided, that cannot be lost. This is the first time your mum is kicking you out of the house. Matrix 4, death and rebirth experience. Emergence. The old self genuinely dissolved. A new relationship with existence beginning. Light and space. The first breath. A new day. The sun is shining brightly. Okay, this one sucks. This is where the doctor slaps you on the backside, and your mom tells you that she loves you. Now, map these four matrices onto the Buddhist bardos. The bardo of living, matrix 1, the ordinary state, the womb. The bardo of dying, matrix 2, the constriction, the inescapable narrowing. The bardo of dharmata, matrix 3, the phenomenal display, the lights and forms and terrifying and beautiful visions, just like all the good and bad thing that life contains. The conditions of human existence. And then matrix 4, the death rebirth experience, emergence, the old self dissolved, a new relationship with existence beginning, light and space. Grof arrived at this map through empirical documentation of thousands of sessions. The Tibetan Book of the Dead arrived at its map through centuries of direct contemplative investigation of the dying and rebirth process. But they're essentially describing the same territory. The dissolution sequence that Kala Rinpoche described is not abstract. It's a map of something that happens to every human being at death, in deep practice, and sometimes unexpectedly, when the valve opens without warning. The earth element dissolves, the body becomes heavy, the ordinary world begins to recede. The water element dissolves, the visual field hazes, objects become strange. The fire element dissolves, heat leaves the periphery, mirage like appearances begin. The wind stops, the breathing stops, the ordinary world is now far above, and the inner dissolutions begin. White light like moonlight, the red light like sunrise, darkness before the dawn. Alice would recognize this. She fell through something like it every time she went to Wonderland. The ordinary world receding above her, strange objects appearing all around her, the fall going deeper than any fall ever should, and then the ground, Wonderland itself. The practitioner who knows the dissolution sequence falls like Alice, with curiosity, with recognition, watching what arises without grasping and without fleeing, still herself, always still herself. And then there's the other way to fall. Hunter Thompson in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, and I'm going to do my best impression here. He wrote, "Holy Jesus, we can't stop here. This is bad country." That's the bardo of Dharmata without preparation. It's the same territory, the same dissolution, the same lights and forms and impossibly strange phenomenal display. But no Alice, no recognition, no training in what to do when the ordinary world stops following its own rules. Just bad country. The 6 yogas of Naropa are training for learning to fall like Alice. Grof spent 50 years sitting with people in bad country and asking, what would it look like if we prepared them for this? What would it look like if the container was strong enough, the intention clear enough, the guide present enough, that the territory could be navigated rather than just survived? His answer was the most detailed cartography of non-ordinary consciousness that Western science has ever produced. And it maps onto the Tibetan Book of the Dead, page by page. In 2008, the cognitive psychologist Benny Shannon, the same scholar who wrote The Antipodes of the Mind, the most rigorous cognitive analysis of ayahuasca visions ever produced, published a paper in the Time and Mind that caused considerable controversy. He pointed out that the Sinai Peninsula and surrounding regions contain 2 plants, Pergamum harmala, Syrian rue, a powerful natural monoamine oxidase inhibitor, or MAOI, and various acacia species containing DMT, the 2 chemical components of ayahuasca. He argued that the combination was known and used ritually in the ancient Near East. And he suggested that the experiences described in Exodus, the burning bush, the theophany at Sinai, the pillar of fire, and the direct encounter with the divine, are consistent with the phenomenology of a powerful holotropic experience. This is not a reduction of Moses, it's the opposite. If Moses had had a genuine encounter with the ground of being, the tatata of experience stripped completely bare, with the Dharmakaya itself, then the question of what opened the valve is secondary to that which came through it. And what came through it shaped three world religions and 3,000 years of human history. Shannon was not the first to notice the great visionary moments of human religious history map onto the holotropic experience. Grof had been documenting this for decades. In the sessions of his research subjects, ordinary people, not mystics, not even practitioners, they found the same archetypal figures appeared, the same cosmic dramas, the same death and rebirth sequences, the same encounters with what could only be described as the divine. Jung had called this the collective unconscious. Grof called it the transpersonal level, a layer of consciousness that lies beneath the personal, beneath even the perinatal, where individual identity dissolves into something that seems to contain all of human experiences simultaneously. The Vedic rishis who built the Rig Veda around a mysterious substance called soma, whatever soma was, were mapping this level. The initiates at Eleusis who drank kykeon almost certainly contained ergot, contaminated barley, the same ergot from which Hofmann synthesized LSD, were also mapping this level. Albert Hofmann, Gordon Wasson, and the classical scholar Karl Ruck made exactly this argument in The Road to Eleusis in 1978. Hofmann had synthesized LSD from ergot. He knew precisely what he was saying. The Eleusinian Mysteries, the most important religious institution of ancient Greece, attended by Plato, Sophocles, Marcus Aurelius, were built around the sacramental opening of the valve. What the initiates experienced there shaped the philosophical tradition of the West, Plato's forms, the theory of the soul, the conviction that what is most real is not the sensory surface, but the ground that underlies it. The territory's not new. Heck, the chemistry's not even new either. What is new is a Czech psychiatrist in the second half of the 20th century with the scientific tools to document it systematically. At Harvard University in the early 1960s, two men were working with psilocybin, the compound Albert Hofmann had synthesized from the mushrooms that R. Gordon Wasson brought back from Maria Sabina's ceremony in Oaxaca. One of them was Timothy Leary, one of them, Richard Alpert, who would later become Ram Dass. We talked about him in our last episode. They had the same access, the same substance, the same university, even the same moment in history. They made completely different choices about what to do with what they found. Leary took the open valve and handed it to a generation with a slogan: tune in, turn on, and drop out. Drop out. I've said it before and I'll say it again. The Dharma says the opposite. You open the valve so you can see more clearly, not so you can leave. The bodhisattva doesn't drop out. The bodhisattva goes back into the world, back into the relationships, back into the difficulty and the beauty of being alive in a body with other people. But now with cleaner eyes, with more of the signal getting through, with the technology of compassion to use instead of a molecule. Leary's instruction was the most spiritually irresponsible 6 words of the 20th century. And not because the experiences weren't real, but because the experiences are so precisely what should make you more engaged with the world, not less. More compassionate, not more detached, more present, not more absent. Nixon called Leary the most dangerous man in America. That was an exaggeration, but the association of psychedelics with irresponsibility shut down legitimate research for a generation. Grof's work was interrupted. Hofmann watched his discovery become a cultural war. Decades of potential progress in the science of consciousness and the potential alleviation of suffering for millions of people was simply lost. Dropping out never made anything better. Now, Richard Alpert made different choices. He went to India. He found a teacher, Neem Karoli Baba. He sat at the feet of someone who had been to the territory without chemistry, who lived there permanently, and he came back as Ram Dass. He wrote Be Here Now, one of the most widely read spiritual books of the 20th century. He spent the rest of his life in service, teaching, giving, showing up. The chemistry opened the door. The practice built the house, and Ram Dass walked through on his own will. One of the most important bodies of work Grof produced was with terminal cancer patients at the Maryland Psychiatric Research Center in the 1970s. Legal LSD-assisted therapy conducted with full scientific rigor in the last period before the research shut down. The results were remarkable and consistent. Patients who had been paralyzed by death anxiety, unable to eat, unable to sleep, unable to be present with the people they loved in their final weeks, experienced one or two carefully guided LSD sessions and a fundamental shift in their relationship with dying. Not because they stopped being afraid, but because they had been to the threshold. They'd encountered something on the other side of ordinary consciousness that made the dissolution of the self feel less like an annihilation and more what the Tibetan tradition calls it, a transition, a doorway. Not an end, but a change of state. Grof described patient after patient who arrived at what only could be called peace. Not recognition, not even denial. Peace. The kind that comes from having seen something directly. Now place this beside Huxley's death. The 100 micrograms at the threshold. Place it beside the 16th Karmapa in that hospital in Zion, Illinois. Place it beside what the tradition teaches about Poa, the transference of consciousness, and the recognition of the clear light at the moment of death. All of these are the same preparation for the same moment. Different vehicles, different centuries, and different traditions. The preparation is real. The threshold is real. The recognition that is possible at that threshold and the peace that comes from having glimpsed it before you arrived is also real. That is what Grof documented. That is what the tradition has always known. So here's where we land. A Czech psychiatrist spent 50 years sitting with people as the valve opened. As the reducing valve Huxley described, and the Yanavarana and the Yogacara tradition mapped, loosened its grip, and the full signal of consciousness came through. What he found was not chaos, not psychosis, not the random firings of a chemically disrupted brain. He found structure, pattern, the coexistence of accumulated karmic residue surfacing to be seen. The perinatal matrices mapping precisely onto the Bardo teachings, the transpersonal level revealing what Jung called the collective unconscious, and what the Tibetan tradition calls the ground of all being. The territory Grof mapped, and the territory the tradition has been navigating for centuries, through practice. Through the sustained cultivation of the quality of attention that allows the valve to open, not for an afternoon, not for a session, but as the ground of how you meet every moment. Moses climbed a mountain and came down changed. The Eleusinian initiates drank their sacred cup and came back with Plato's forms. The Vedic rishis drank soma and came back with the Upanishads. Albert Hofmann rode his bicycle home and came back with 50 years of his problem child, reshaping everything we thought we knew about mind. The valve opens. The territory is real. What you do next, that's the practice. Thank you for listening to the very end. If these conversations are meeting you on a deeper level, please hit subscribe, like, and share it with a friend who might also be ready to hear the message. My algorithm needs your love, and I'm very thankful. Next time, we go to the Amazon, to a vine and a leaf that has been used ceremonially for centuries, to a living religion that holds the sacrament inside a Catholic and religious framework simultaneously, and the experience of what happens when the ceremony is the container, and the container is everything. Until then, pay attention to what your ordinary mind is filtering. The tatata is always there. The valve is always available to open. The work is learning to open it yourself. Here and now never ends. This is QP. Sound is emptiness. Emptiness is sound. Catch you next time.